Hello and thanks for joining me for this special edition. I'm Sarah Coates and we'll be live for the next hour bringing you all the updates from the situation on the ground as Russia continues its 11th day of the invasion of Ukraine. All right, let's bring in journalist Stanislav Rubashuk joining us live from Kiev. Stanislav, thank you for your time firstly. Look, tell us, what is the situation on the ground at this hour with Russian troops? We're seeing absolutely harrowing videos.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I'm out of the city in a more relaxed zone, so to say, because I'm to the northwest from the city, which is, southwest, which is a bit away from the fighting, since it's actually coming from the north, from Belarusian borders. As I just spoken to most of my friends, everyone is mostly terrified by the fact that the last few days, like 2 days, were relatively okay-ish in comparison to what was happening before. So to all of the people in the wartime, after more than a week of fighting, this doesn't mean anything good. So people are mostly expecting Russian forces to proceed with something more, let's say, built up or advanced rather than they had been doing before.
And, what is the latest with regards to these evacuation efforts? These shocking photos are circulating of this family taken by a New York Times photographer there.
To the best of my knowledge, a few of my friends were killed during the same time because they were trying to deliver food in the next villages, or in some of the, not villages, but some of the houses in the same city. Right next to Kiev. Another friend of mine, my coworker, was driving 160 kilometers per hour within the city to somehow try and get her family out, since they've found a car and whatsoever. So there are just stories that I can tell rather than the situation. It's absolutely immense. The Russian soldiers on the ground there are going I don't know the word. I wanted to say bananas, but it doesn't sound any kind of funny. What I mean is that they are up to, approximately to the stories, they're up to raping, they're up to locating anyone alive in the city and just killing them in the undergrounds. It's a complete mess. There is no control, no forces from the government, because they just cannot get there. They're protecting the city as a wide, and whoever is left is just there on their own. That's my take on the situation right now.
Stanislav, I'm so sorry to hear about your friends. Tell me, what are you expecting in the coming days, the coming hours?
It feels like there will be a massive buildup of the Russian forces. Not the ones coming, the new ones coming, but rather all of those present in the area coming together and trying to build up some kind of a massive all-in attack on Kiev. Because given their structural developments all over the country, it looks like they are in desperate need of some kind of victory. There should be something on Russian television that is absolutely true, rather than all of the fakes that are happening up to this day. And Kiev would be one of those victories. Obviously, Zelensky, as he already told the world, is the #1 target. I fully believe in that. Yeah. Therefore, I think that is the thing that we would all, fear or expect. And I think that our military forces are also preparing for that larger strike, or whatever it comes from. NATO is not closing the sky. Poland has already rejected opening their fields. So inside the country, it still feels like we're mostly on our own. I know that there is a massive international support, but when you're sitting 20 kilometers away from the line, it doesn't feel that way. We need something more significant, let's say a piece of metal that can help us protect ourselves, rather than even humanitarian aid. Although, as I said before, we're deeply thankful for anything that people worldwide are sending our way.
Yeah, and with regards to that, we've seen these images of people sheltering there in the metros, underground, anywhere they can. Do these people have food and water?
One of my friends, again, unfortunately, that is what I can tell for any kind of a question, as far as I can tell, is still for about a week now, spending all of her nights in the metro station, because it's the safest thing. It was built during the USSR times to withstand whatever the nuclear disaster. From the stories that she's telling, they have everything. So they have warm water, they have warm food, they have like a schedule of the workers bringing or cleaning or whatsoever. So she feels like it's more of a hotel if you kind of, forget about everything. The only problem, the real problem is that it's very cold because the ground is not metal, I forgot the word, like a rock bed. So it's pretty difficult to keep it warm. There are no systems that were meant to actually heat up because it's still warmer than on the ground due to the depth level. But otherwise, yes, the city was definitely preparing for this scenario, and therefore all of the metro stations are equipped as fully as they can be in these harsh times.
And, I just want to briefly circle back to Zelensky there. We did hear some reports coming in just a little while ago that Russian forces do actually know where he is. Have you heard anything like that?
Well, that if I would try to give you something like this, that would be a lie, obviously, because I cannot, and I'm not even trying to find that kind of information. But he's definitely in the city. So when you consider a high-scale military operation like this, with part of the country available, so to say, there is not that much place to hide. What I'm trying to say is that the circumference of the area that Zelensky can be in is still like, I don't know, 30 kilometers, let's say, and there are still only a few protected areas where he can potentially be. Therefore, I would agree that they know.
All right. Well, look, Stanislav, thank you so much for your time this evening. And once again, I'm so sorry that you're going through this in your country. I really hope it, all turns out okay.
I will surely hope so too. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Now, while the balance of power in the war in Eastern Europe clearly favours the Russian army, the Ukrainian army is able to inflict substantial losses. Well, it's partly due to the flow of Western ammunition constantly going into Ukraine. I24 News defence correspondent Jonathan Regev with the details.
The Ukrainian army is far inferior than the Russian one in practically every aspect, but it is still putting up a courageous and at many times successful fight.
Yes! Yes, блядь!
Foreign nations may not be placing their boots on the ground, but they are supplying Ukraine with exceptional amounts of weapons.
Another taboo has fallen. The taboo that the European Union was not providing arms in a war.
Almost the entire Western world is sending military assistance to Ukraine, not just European Union nations, but also the United Kingdom, which recently left the EU, Australia, the United States, and Canada.
Today, we are announcing that we will be supplying Ukraine with anti-tank weapons systems and upgraded ammunition. Of course, this is in addition to our 3 previous shipments of lethal and non-lethal equipment.
The assistance includes mostly what is described as lethal defensive weapons, anti-aircraft batteries, anti-tank systems, surface-to-air missiles and rocket launchers, along with rifles, ammunition, fuel, and even food rations are being shipped. Even Germany, once forbidden from having a military, now has a much stronger presence in Europe and is supplying help. It's a major boost for the Ukrainian forces, but is it enough? Probably not.
NATO as a defense alliance has to provide us with this defense military equipment because it has this equipment and we need it right now. And NATO is our strategic partner. I just don't understand why NATO is so slow.
Military assistance is coming, but foreign armies are camouflaging themselves only on the border, and a closed airspace is out of the question. On the ground, eventually, the Ukrainians may be using foreign arms and ammunition, but they're fighting by themselves.
And we're going out for a short break, but we'll continue with our coverage when we get back. Don't go anywhere.
Breaking news again. But there's always more to the story, especially here in the Middle East.
What's really going on in the region? Well, unless you're actually here, you can't really tell.
Join us here at the beating heart of the new Middle East
To get a true perspective on what's really going on.
Imagine being able to see into the future.
We can take you there. What innovations will change the world as we know it? Where can you get the most bang for your buck? I'm Natasha Kirchuk, journalist, traveler, and the host of Israel Business Beat. Join us as we meet the people changing our planet and discover the inventions shaping tomorrow.
Israel Business Beat, Sundays and Wednesdays, 9:30 p.m. GMT. These images haven't been seen in Europe for decades, but now they have become Ukraine's daily reality. As Russia wages war against the Ukraine, our correspondents are on the ground, on the streets, in cities, on the border. Ukraine under fire. Special coverage only on I-24 News.
Welcome back as we continue with our coverage of the situation in Ukraine with Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett arriving back in Israel in the early hours of this morning after a whirlwind trip to Europe, travelling to Moscow where he sat down with Russian President Putin before jetting off to Berlin to meet the German Chancellor, as the crisis escalates, with the trip seen as an attempt by Israel to try and mediate the situation. Well, our diplomatic correspondent Ellie Hockenberg has more.
Slim chance, but genuine intention. Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett boosting his shot to play mediator between Russia and Ukraine.
I returned a few hours ago from Moscow and Berlin. I went there in order to help with the dialogue between all parties, of course, with the encouragement of all sides.
Bennett landed at the Ben Gurion airport Sunday morning after taking off to Moscow on Saturday, becoming the first Western leader to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin since the invasion of Ukraine began. From there, Bennett headed straight to Berlin to meet German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, but not before speaking over the phone with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and French President Emmanuel Macron. A third phone call with Zelensky within 24 hours was also held once Bennett touched base back in Jerusalem, right in time for the weekly cabinet meeting.
Once there is even a small opportunity and we have access to all sides and the ability to mediate, I see it as our moral duty to make every effort. As long as the candle is lit, one must make an effort, and perhaps it is still possible to act.
But it's not just a sense of moral obligation, perhaps. Israel has been delicately navigating between its diplomatic commitments and security interests since the onset of the invasion, unwilling to risk its cooperation with Moscow in Syria and elsewhere, but cannot afford to destabilize its strong alliance with Washington. But the latter might have happened to an extent, with Israeli officials saying the mediation initiative is being coordinated with the Americans, and with their blessing, State Department officials remain skeptical. There is no doubt that Bennett's voyage is putting Jerusalem at the very top of the global diplomatic arena, a rare opportunity for any country, especially a much debated one like Israel. But with high prospects also come high risks. All eyes will now be on Jerusalem's actions, or lack thereof, and every step it takes is set to bring praise and condemnation in equal measure. And whether this mediation attempt will bear any fruits of peace or not, it is far too early to tell whether Bennett's leap, or rather flight of faith, would prove to be a worthwhile gamble.
And Ellie Hockenberg joins me here in studio. Ellie, thank you. Firstly, what more do we know about this trip? Did he make any headway with Putin there at the Kremlin.
So first of all, Sarah, we have some follow-up conversations earlier today with Zelensky, as mentioned in the report. But this evening, he already spoke again, a follow-up conversation, phone call with President Putin, and also two other phone calls with French President Emmanuel Macron and the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. So keeping everyone up to speed. Tomorrow, Monday, the Israeli Foreign Minister Yair Lapid is heading to Latvia for a very quick visit, specifically aimed at meeting U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken to make sure everyone's on the same page. And we've raised some questions in this report. How involved are the Americans in this? So again, the meeting tomorrow between Lapid and Blinken signals that Jerusalem understands very well that Washington's involvement is of paramount importance. As for the progress, Israeli media is quoting sources close to Bennett this evening as saying that he's not really seeking to be mediator, but more of an intermediary, perhaps just sending messages back and forth as both sides agree to talk to at this point in time. So trying to perhaps tone down the excitement surrounding it. But again, the mere fact that Bennett is so hands-on, that Jerusalem is so invested and involved in this global crisis is definitely something worthwhile. And this perhaps takes us to the hidden interest, not so hidden, the nuclear talks with Iran. It's money time there. Jerusalem's stance was well heard, but not really acted upon. Russia's interest perhaps coincides with the Israeli ones. Not too eager that the agreement with Iran will be finalized at this point in time. A, because of oil. Russia does not want Iran to be able to export oil while it itself is unable. And B, it wants to bear the fruit of a potential agreement. And if it is so heavily sanctioned and excluded from global dynamics, perhaps again Russia and Israel both at this point in time are not too eager to see this agreement being signed.
All right, Ellie Hulkenberg, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, meanwhile, refugees are beginning to arrive here in Israel as the crisis in Ukraine worsens, with Israel now expecting a wave of tens of thousands of displaced Ukrainians to enter over the coming year. Well, here's more from our correspondent Batya Levinthal, who's at Israel's International Airport.
A busy and emotional day here at Ben Gurion, Israel's International Airport, as 3 flights coming mainly from Warsaw, Poland, bringing hundreds of Ukrainian refugees landed. The last one landing a couple of hours into the late afternoon, with so many new faces now being welcomed into Israel as a place of refuge. One of the flights brought in over 100 children from orphanages throughout Ukraine. The Israeli Premier Naftali Bennett, as well as other ministers in his cabinet, meeting not only the children but also other refugees that were arriving today. Some of them, though, have caused quite a lot of political infighting within the Israeli government, as the majority of the 2,000 Ukrainian refugees that have since arrived in Israel since the start of Russia's invasion into Ukraine, 90% are not Jewish. And according to one camp in particular in the Israeli government, they should be giving first priority to those that are Jewish, giving them the right of return or the law of return, making sure that Jewish refugees are getting first and foremost into the country, which at the moment only make up around 10% of those 2,000. The other camp in the Israeli government is essentially saying that the bureaucracy and hurdle that non-Jews have to jump through is beyond ridiculous and very unfair, and this is a humanitarian crisis where they should be treated as humans regardless. Earlier during the day, we managed to speak to a Ukrainian-Israeli dual national who had been waiting at the airport for hours for his sister and her family to arrive from Kiev, a family that is non-Jewish, and he spoke to us about some of the hurdles that they had to jump through in order to get here.
We're simply exhausted. I have been in constant contact with them since the fighting began. I'm glad they're here today in a safe place. Experience was very difficult. There was so much bureaucracy, documents, phone calls to the foreign minister and to foundations. It was really hard, like operating a command room in our home.
outside of the flights that arrived today from Poland with the Ukrainian refugees, as well as the chaos happening and unfolding within the Israeli government. Something very interesting that happened here this evening at the Israel International Airport is that flights from Moscow were in fact landing. Now, Israel is quite an anomaly here, as most of Russia's national airlines, Aeroflot, have been banned from landing in most of Europe at the moment. But not only are they still being allowed to fly into Israel, but they haven't stopped since the start of the war. When we spoke to an official here at the airport, we were told that these are mostly dual citizens that are returning, or Israelis that are making their way back to Israel. But it just goes to show the complex reality that Israel has in between Russia and Ukraine, and why a potential mediation effort, according to Naftali Bennett, the Prime Minister, no matter how small or whether or not it actually brings in fruitful results, is an effort nonetheless. And we can see that complexity here during the day as both flights landing from both countries currently at war with each other. But that's the situation and the reality, unfortunately, on the ground. Patch Leventhal reporting from Israel's Ben Gurion International Airport for I-24 News.
Now, a little earlier, we spoke to Veronica, who's a Ukrainian refugee who's just arrived here in Israel. Here's her story.
I woke up on February 24th at 5 a.m. because of a very loud and weird noise. I didn't understand what was going on. You know, when you suddenly wake up in the middle of the night, you feel disorientated. At first, I thought I must have imagined it, and I went back to sleep. But then it happened again. I got really scared, so I woke up my boyfriend. We have a group chat of Odessa residents. I'm from Odessa. And we started reading it. And there were so many messages from people writing the same thing. Some kind of explosions all over the city. In about 30 minutes, we heard another round of explosions, and we started getting the news that Russia invaded Ukraine. It was so scary, straight out of a nightmare. My sister lives in Israel. She's Israeli. She told me to pack my things and come to Israel. So I started packing, but I only took a backpack. I put all of my documents and a couple of T-shirts. I couldn't think straight. I was so scared. Then I thought, okay, I have to think about how we're going to get out of here. So the closest way was by bus to the border with Moldova. Turns out that all the bus routes were either canceled or fully booked. And then my boyfriend told me he wasn't coming with me. His parents are in Odessa. He couldn't leave them. I called my sister again. Turned out her ex-mother-in-law was in Odessa and was trying to go to Israel too. So we decided to go together. I started looking for buses obsessively, and I managed to find 2 last tickets to Moldova. So I bought them online, and we went to the bus station. At the bus station, they told us they didn't accept online tickets and that we had to exchange them for regular ones. When I went to the ticket office, they told us they'd sold our tickets to someone else. So I started calling the company, and I managed to reach the director. And he told me we could go standing. It's a 4-hour drive. At the end of the day, we got on the bus and managed to sit, but a lot of people were standing. There were so many people there, young, old, kids. It was chaos. People were shouting, crying, pushing, shoving each other, trying to get on a bus. I didn't even give my boyfriend a proper goodbye. We barely hugged each other. And we were gone. There were so many people fleeing Ukraine. The roads were packed. It took us 15 hours to get to Moldova instead of 4. I barely remember what it was like. At some point, I was so stressed. I called my sister and I told her I wasn't coming. I wanted to get off the bus. I wanted to go back to Odessa, to my boyfriend, to my family. She said, no, you're halfway there. Hold on. After we crossed the border with Moldova, we stayed there for about 24 hours looking for ways to go further because Moldova closed its airspace. I found a bus that was going to Bulgaria via Romania, and so we went. My friend met me there in Bulgaria. We went to her place and had some sleep, and then we went to the airport. Finally, on Tuesday night, I landed here in Israel.
And Veronica, you still have family and friends there, as you mentioned. What are they telling you?
Half of my family is in Russia. The other half is in Ukraine. It's normal for us, Ukrainians and Russians. Many of us have friends, relatives in both countries. That's why what's happening now is so absurd, so scary. What is the situation? We're all relatives. We're brothers. My father, my boyfriend, and all of my friends are in Odessa. How do I feel? I'm extremely stressed. First, I was scared. Then I was very, very angry. I felt aggression, bitterness, and complete emptiness. I didn't know what would happen next. I still don't know. I don't know if we'll ever see them again. I don't know what to do next. It's hard.
You clearly love your country. Tell me, how likely is it that you'll be able to return?
Смотрите, во-первых, я не могу остаться в Израиле, потому что я не еврейка.
Firstly, I can't stay in Israel because I'm not Jewish. Secondly, I had a great job back in Odessa. All of my friends, my boyfriend, his family, they're all there. I want to come back to Odessa. I want to come back home, to my loved ones, my house, my pets. I want to come back to my normal life. But I'm extremely grateful to the people of Israel. I came here with nothing, just my backpack. I packed in a daze. I only had like 2 t-shirts. I posted in a group on Facebook, and people started reaching out to me right away. They helped me with clothes, shoes, even contact lenses. I have a poor eyesight. People sent me so many supportive messages. I'm forever grateful.
Просто в самое сердце.
All right, Veronica, thank you. We need to go out for a short break, but we'll continue with our coverage when we get back. Stay right there.
Esta semana en News 24, Rusia invadió Ucrania, una guerra que quiebra el orden mundial. La Guerra Fría está más caliente que nunca. Día Internacional de la Mujer. Karina Dica, psicóloga y sexóloga, responde a preguntas picantes que hacen a la búsqueda del amor y la vida en pareja. El Viena Tango Quintet, conducido por Ronen Nissan, su director musical, interpreta en Yiddish tango judío. News 24, el magazine semanal en español de i24 News.
The i24 News team of talented correspondents are working hard for you. They're in the markets, on the streets, in the battlefields, getting the pulse of the story. Tune in for Beyond the Headlines to see how the top stories of the week are affecting real people. No commentary, no debate, just the best stories presented by our best journalists.
Strictly Security, your weekly look into security, intelligence, and strategic affairs. Our team brings the latest on the major international conflicts, analysis of the major security issues right here in the Middle East and around the globe. Join us for a close look at innovative military technology and get up to speed with what's happening in cyberspace. Saturdays, only on i24 News.
Zoom in, past the sound bites and beyond the numbers. Zoom in, between the people and into the Middle East conflict. I'm Jeff Smith. Together, we'll zoom in Sunday through Thursday nights, only on i24 News.
Welcome back. Well, hundreds of thousands of people have been taking to the streets right across Russia to denounce President Putin and the invasion of Ukraine, with police seen here violently arresting protesters, some elderly and some children. Now, to remind our viewers, it is illegal to demonstrate in Russia, with a new law that's just been enacted threatening people with up to 15 years jail time for spreading what the Kremlin sees as false information on Russia's actions in Ukraine. Well, as another day passes in the Russian war against Ukraine, yet another Western firm is moving to boycott Moscow. Visa and MasterCard announcing Saturday they'll be clamping down on the Russian operations of their cards, just the latest nail to the increasing isolation of the Russian economy on the world stage. Mary McAuliffe has this report.
U.S. firms Visa and MasterCard are joining a number of financial and technology companies in suspending Russian operations over the invasion of Ukraine. In a statement, Visa's chief executive officer said, quote, "We are compelled to act following Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine and the unacceptable events that we have witnessed." The move means that beginning March 10th, any transaction initiated with cards issued in Russia will no longer work outside the country, and cards issued outside of the country will not work inside Russia either. Visa and MasterCards issued by domestic banks will continue to work in Russia. The decision was welcomed by U.S. President Joe Biden in a call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, according to the White House. Russian banks are downplaying the impact, but it could spell further disruption for Russians, who are already bracing for an uncertain future of spiraling inflation, economic hardship, and even sharper squeeze on imported goods.
I have $100 that I haven't spent for 2 years, expecting things to get worse, but that's hardly going to help me get through.
The avalanche of Western sanctions, to quote the Russian foreign minister, have sent the Russian ruble into freefall, barred several Russian banks from the global SWIFT payment system, and frozen much of the central bank's $640 billion in assets. With Russia's economy feeling the squeeze and the country increasingly becoming a pariah state, many Russians have begun to flee the country.
They don't expect anything good to happen. They don't feel safe. They know that the economical situation will be very hard from now on, and also many people, they just kind of from a moral perspective, they can bear staying.
The move by Visa and MasterCard gives even more momentum to Russian efforts to increase its financial system's independence, something it has been investing in ever since ties with the West deteriorated following the annexation of Crimea in 2014. On Sunday, several Russian banks said they would soon start issuing cards using the Chinese UnionPay card operator system in conjunction with the Russian Mir network. But Mir cards only work in select countries, including Turkey, Vietnam, and Belarus, making it just the latest blow in Russia's deepening economic isolation.
And Dr. Alex Coleman, who's an economist at Tel Aviv University, joins me in the studio. Dr. Alex Coleman, thank you so much for coming in. Look, tell me, right now Russians are completely cut off. What is the likelihood that we may see this, being reversed any time in the future?
Well, Putin is a time machine. He brought Russia back to the 50s, to the 60s, when in the Soviet Union you had all these jokes about standing in line for bread, standing in line for eggs. This is incredible. But what's more incredible than that is the simple Russian individual believes totally a different narrative than the one we're talking about in the West. So they do not say, okay, Putin decided to invade Ukraine, so the West retaliated. No, they see it. The West wanted to take Russia, shred it down into tiny, tiny, tiny bits, because they cannot stand Russia the way it is. They wanted to bring nuclear missiles, and so everything that happens is the West's fault. So the worse it gets, the more Russia basically crowds itself around Putin. I believe that if they had elections today, Putin would get fantastic majority in those elections, because Russia would basically crowd itself around him.
Tell me, what about the Russians abroad? I guess a lot of those people don't share that same sentiment. And, these people, let's think about them traveling. How are they going to get by?
They're devastated. I mean, I know Russian people in Portugal, because they're cut off their money. So they cannot go with their credit card and put it in an ATM and get their money. They cannot pay, so they're basically homeless. because they're stuck abroad. Of course, they would not go back, and they cannot access their funds. But this person, we're talking about middle class people outside of Russia, does not concern Putin at all. These are the people that demonstrate. These are the people that are beaten up, locked for years. They are the worst layer in the population because they're not the oligarchs who are Putin's friends, so they're just alienated.
Let's talk now about this Russian gas. You know, right now, well, Europe is so dependent on it. It currently has stores, but that is eventually going to run out in the next few months. What will this transaction potentially look like?
Therefore, everything is done half-heartedly, because when they disconnected Russian banks from the monetary system, from the SWIFT, they did not disconnect the banks that belong to Gazprom, the Russian gas company. So they did not do that, so they'd be able to pay for the gas, and they keep and make sure. So everything is done half-heartedly because the West is not really willing to pay a price, and pay a price means freeze in the winter.
Yeah, and you know, tell me, how do you expect these to sort of play out, ricochet around the world with regards to the global economy, food prices, etc.?
Well, we are paying these prices in terms of gas. We're going to start paying through the nose for flour, for wheat, because wheat is not going to, because of the Ukraine and Russia, so we're going to have problems with that. Of course, the West could boycott Russian wheat, but that would only make the crisis more severe. So everything is done half-heartedly. You know, we talk the talk, but we don't walk the walk. And I'm afraid that I cannot imagine a single move from the West that would cause Putin to break, to tell his tanks, guys, turn around, forward march. We'll need to come up with some golden ladder for him to get down off the tree and get his victory picture, bare breast, putting his foot on the late Ukrainian president and declaring victory. So I always imagine something like bear hunting or whatever. So I cannot envision a single act by the West that would cause Putin to turn around.
So, can we expect harsher sanctions? Is that even possible?
Yes, we can expect, but not many more. Not significant many more.
So, you're saying that we need some sort of magical thing to bring him back. Yes. What on earth could that be, really?
Total devastation of the Ukraine. I mean, he needs to show that when he points at the country, this country is gone. I've been reading Pravda, which is basically Putin's horn. And Pravda basically says there's no such country as the Ukraine. It's a fake country. It's controlled. I mean, this non-existent country is controlled by Nazis. So it's incredible. I mean, you look at it and your eyes are just, you're incredulous.
Yeah.
So I cannot see them stop before total devastation.
Yeah, wow. And how long do you believe that, we're seeing these price hikes, et cetera, how long do you see this as sort of going on for, affecting the global economy?
Well, luckily, we only have something like 2 months of winter, right? If we are now in March. So luckily, we're going to come out of the winter. And when we're out of winter, we'll be less dependent on Putin. So we'll be able to tighten a little bit more. And the tiny Russian guys will really pay the price. Putin will not. It always reminds me of Stalin. The Nazis, they got his child and he said, I don't care. So the ability to absorb blows is formidable.
Wow, what an absolutely shocking situation, to say the very least. Dr. Alex Coman, it's always a pleasure to have you in. Thank you so much.
Not this time, but in
Not this time. Lovely to speak to you, though.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're taking you out for a short break, but we'll continue our coverage when we get back. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome to the I-24 News Desk.
Now more details on a developing story.
Breaking news at this hour.
It is history in the making.
When news breaks in the Middle East and around the world, our team of experienced journalists are here, around the clock.
To keep you up to date with the news of the day.
Where it happens, when it happens.
Stay tuned and stay informed.
Every day on the hour.
The heart of the new Middle East beats on I-24 News.
The Middle East. I-24 News is a witness. Our journalists live and breathe there every day. Get all the latest global news from our studios in Tel Aviv, New York, Washington, and Paris. Anytime, anywhere. Download the I-24 News app, available on Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple, and Google stores. I-24 News, see beyond.
Welcome back. Well, the sanctions on Russia are taking a toll on President Putin's Latin American allies. Nicaragua was depending on Russian banks to finance the expansion of Managua Airport. Now, while the expulsion of Russian banks from SWIFT has also impacted Venezuelan President Maduro, Rafael Romo reports on Russia's relations with Latin American countries.
When Russia's Deputy Prime Minister Yuri Borisov visited Venezuela last month, he was given the red carpet treatment and was welcomed at the Miraflores presidential palace by Nicolás Maduro himself.
Son nuestros hermanos.
Maduro referred to Russians as our brothers and described his country's relationship with Russia in glowing terms. Before having his oil minister sign multiple agreements involving topics of mutual interest, including military cooperation, Borisov promised to help in the fight against external meddling. The top Russian official would later make stops in Nicaragua and Cuba, part of a Latin American tour to strengthen relations with allies in the weeks before Russia's invasion of Ukraine. As expected, once the invasion started, Nicolás Maduro sided with Russia.
Look
at what they're doing with Russia. It is a crime what they're doing with the Russian people, he said. They kicked them out of SWIFT. They closed airspace. They shut down commercial links, and they prohibited them from having access to the dollar. What they're doing with Russia is madness, Maduro said. But some Venezuelans took to the streets in the first days of the invasion to denounce it, defying Maduro's position and telling the world the Venezuelan leader doesn't speak for them.
In the more than 2 decades Vladimir Putin has been in power, his government has strived to forge alliances with several countries in Latin America, showing his political and financial muscle in an apparent effort to tell the international community that Russia is not isolated and that it has partners around the world.
At the same time Putin's deputy prime minister was shaking hands in Latin America, the Russian leader was greeting Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro last month in Moscow. And in early February, Argentinian President Alberto Fernandez said Russia should be Latin America's alternative to the United States and the IMF when it comes to finding sources of funding and credit. We have to see in what way Argentina can become the entryway for Russia to enter Latin America, Fernandez said. Brazil's Bolsonaro said the invasion is no massacre and mirrored Russian propaganda by adding that Putin is only protecting 2 regions in Ukraine seeking independence.
No vamos a tomar ninguna
And even though Mexico voted in favor of condemning the invasion at the UN's General Assembly last week, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador said his government won't impose any sanctions on Russia. We want to maintain good relations with all countries in the world, the leftist leader said. Rafael Romo, CNN, Atlanta.
Moving on, and what opinions are we allowed to have on the Ukraine conflict, and what news are we allowed to hear? Well, that depends entirely on where you live, as both West and East establish their narratives, now backed by force of law, as they battle to control public perception. Well, I-24 News technology correspondent Ariel Levin-Waldman gives us a look inside the digital front.
As war in Europe rages on, so too does protest, something that is not always appreciated, or in some countries, even tolerated. In Russia, that means 15 years in prison for anyone discrediting the military with what the Kremlin calls fake news. The Czech Republic said anyone issuing statements in support of Putin or Russia's military faces 3 years in jail. Slovakia warned citizens that such war propaganda is punishable by 25 years to life. Between the West and Moscow, information has become just as much a battleground as the actual front.
Obviously, Putin's shutting these people down because he's afraid, right? He wouldn't be shutting them down if everything's going peachy keen. If they're not, it's an indicator of his state of mind.
The weekend saw Russia block access to Facebook, just days after similarly banning Twitter. The move comes after the platforms marked Russian sources as misinformation. But that came after many Western nations and digital platforms blocked access to Russia Today and Sputnik, or banned accounts from posting their message, meaning that in each sphere of influence, only one narrative exists.
So the idea of blocking state media and ultimately in retaliation, the Russians blocking access to Western websites and digital platforms is going to essentially piecemeal and fragment the international information environment.
Russia's block of U.S.-based social media comes after it purged the BBC, Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, and German Deutsche Welle. In return, CNN, Bloomberg, and BBC announced they would suspend Russian operations, and journalists fled the country. The end result? Russians cannot voice opposition to the war, nor can many East Europeans in the EU. And in the West, skepticism of NATO will lead to heavy criticism and possible deplatforming. Not comparable to Russia's draconian punishments, but still making some people think twice. Just where does that leave dissident voices?
In the short term, the blocking of state media has encouraged a Russian response of blocking Western headquartered digital platforms, removing a key channel through which prominent Russians have been expressing their dissatisfaction for the war. So that takes away a key form of protest for them.
In previous conflicts, the internet has allowed independent voices to contradict official propaganda on all sides. But as the Russia-Ukraine war grinds on, dissent may have a heavy price.
Well, as Ukraine's humanitarian crisis worsens, one Ukrainian orphanage in the Black Sea city of Odessa that rescues Jewish children has been struggling to protect its young wards as the war turns more violent and ruthless. Well, Israel Business Beat host Natasha Kirchak visited that orphanage herself 3 years ago, called the Hatikva Orphanage, and checked in with staff members again now to see how they're coping.
איזה ילד חמוד אתה, איזה ילד חמוד. כן, שלום.
These children are just some of the more than 100,000 kids living in orphanages across Ukraine. They've been left to fend on their own because their parents just can't take care of them. But now their lives are being uprooted again as Russia invades Ukraine and violence rages across the country. Orphanages are finding themselves in limbo. They don't know if the government will cut off funding, if they'll run out of food and medicine, or where to go with hundreds of children in tow, most of whom don't even have passports. In 2019, I was in Ukraine, filming a series of stories about the southern city of Odessa. Just 3 years ago, Odessa was a blossoming city. Tourism was booming, and foreign investment was pouring into local real estate and business development. But even then, unemployment, poverty, and alcoholism was running rampant in Ukraine. I saw that firsthand at the Hatikva orphanage. For over 2 decades, they've been rescuing Jewish children at risk throughout Ukraine. And since 1996, they've saved over 2,000 kids from the misery of state-run orphanages. These children aren't eligible for adoption because of bureaucratic issues with the Ukrainian government. So instead, they live in a group home in Odessa, where they receive around-the-clock care. Today, around 200 of these children have been living together in this very home. But not anymore. As conflict rages, they've been split up and evacuated.
I'm going to offer you a SIM card per family. Okay? They have minutes to call back in Ukraine, and they have 60 gig of internet. It's for free.
I'm Rabbi Aryeh Rov, and I help run the Hatikva orphanage. Right now, I'm on the border of Moldova and Romania with tons of Jewish families and students from our community in Odessa. We fled Odessa to Moldova because it was the closest country to us. But the situation there was out of control because there were too many refugees. So we're crossing over to Romania, but this is only half of our group because there are many that can't get out of Ukraine.
The orphans living with Hatikva who are under the age of 18 don't have passports, and even if they do, they can't leave Ukraine without the permission of their birth parents, most of whom are very difficult to find or reach.
We knew this would be a problem, so we started preparing a place for the kids to go before Russia even invaded Ukraine, since we had the feeling that things could go south at any moment. Almost all of the 200 orphans we have been raising are sheltering at a remote campsite in northwest Ukraine with their caretakers. They have hot food, and we're trying to run school classes so life feels as normal as possible. We're in contact with the Israeli government, and they're doing everything they can to try and help us and see if we can evacuate the kids, but it's still a waiting game.
Hundreds of thousands of people have fled Ukraine, and while most have made their way west into neighboring countries like Moldova and Poland, many are trying to enter Israel. It's believed that 200,000 people living in Ukraine have the right to immigrate to Israel under its right of return policy. But at this point, Israel's bracing for the arrival of up to 10,000 immigrants.
We've received an outpouring of offerings from people to help place the orphans with families within Ukraine until we can figure out if we can get them to Israel. But we've decided that we are not splitting the children up. The kids are asking us so many questions. What will happen? Will everyone be able to go home? They have so many questions. We are trying to show them that we are here for them. We are one family, and that no matter what happens, we won't split up. That's the best we can do right now.
Renowned chef Jose Andres has taken his non-profit to Ukraine's borders. World Central Kitchen is handing out hot meals to refugees as they cross into Poland. Well, Anderson Cooper caught up with Andreas in a kitchen in Lviv.
Babo Garden's restaurant in Lviv has no paying customers, but its kitchen is bustling. Every day they prepare some 2,000 hot meals for those fleeing the fighting in the east. They started doing this on their own, but now are being supported by Chef Jose Andres and his humanitarian relief organization, World Central Kitchen.
So what's happening here?
Well, this is one of our partner kitchens. And the partnership happened, like always happens, before even we land. We contact them, sometimes they contact us.
Jose Andres has been serving thousands of meals to refugees on the Polish side of the border, but in the last few days he's begun operating inside Ukraine.
This is also going to be potentially a very long effort. I mean, this conflict can go on for a long time. There's probably going to be more and more people fleeing cities and coming through Lviv.
This is, before we know it, is going to become the city of cities for refugees within Ukraine, and obviously people that are going to be living. But this is going to be the place that everybody is going to be flowing. Restaurants like this are going to be playing a crucial role.
At Lviv's train station, it is chaotic and confusing. People come and go, exhausted and hungry, their futures uncertain. When the meals arrive, they're brought to a crowded room where women and children rest before trying to move on to Poland or other countries. The food goes fast. Back at the restaurant, more is already being prepared.
It also seems like everyone here in Ukraine, if they can't carry a weapon, if they can't make a Molotov cocktail, they want to do something. They want to feed people. They want to contribute to this effort.
Feeding is another form of fighting. Actually, feeding is the best way of fighting. If we could all believe like longer tables will win the day and not crazy higher walls and bombing people away.
Bigger tables, you're saying?
Longer tables that we can sit everybody and to say it's more things that unite us than not. Come on. Why we don't build longer tables based on the common history, not used to try to break people apart. And one person creating mayhem, who are we as humans? We are 9 billion people in planet Earth. We're gonna let one person destroy what we are trying to build? Humanity is gonna have to learn that we cannot let leaders that breaks us apart, that bring our worst demons from within us. We, the people, need to start betting on leaders. Doesn't matter what they want to do, right or left, but people that want to build a better world, in reality, not with speeches, but with actions. We need.
And we'll see you all tomorrow, but for now, good night.